Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to start a series of how Bobby Fischer became the world champion. So we're going to go through a series of his games and his journey to the candidates and progression from the candidates to the world championship match, and go through all the games that he played. So the year is 1970. Fischer is roughly around the age of 27, and he plays his first game in the tournament, the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal, against a player called Robert Hübner, a German player, grandmaster, who is incredibly strong. And this tournament was a tournament with 24 really strong players at the time, and the top 6 progressed to the candidates matches. So typically in this tournament, it was said that many players were quite conservative because you only needed to get top 6. But apparently Fischer was rather aggressive in his games, and he actually got off to a clear lead in the first section of the tournament. But anyway, this is the first game, and Fischer was playing with the white pieces and Huebner was playing with black. And Huebner was actually a very young man at the time. He was aged 22 years old. Now, for those who don't know, Huebner is also a very strong player, and he actually made the candidates tournaments 3 times in his life, and has been a very consistent strong player throughout his life. And in 1983, actually, he lost to Smyslov. I guess the match was actually drawn in the candidates, but he lost over a roulette spin. So you could say he's been rather unlucky in the candidates tournaments. There was a few other situations where he was a bit unlucky to lose, which wasn't really based on any chess skill. I believe Huebner also has withdrawn from a few events or matches because he didn't like the conditions, or something upset him anyway. So a bit like Fischer, he seems to be actually quite a highly strung player. But anyway, let's get on with this game. So this was played in the year 1970, around 50 years ago. So Fischer began with e4, Huebner played c6, the Caro-Kann, and now Fischer played a d3 system. Black played d5, and now Fischer played knight to d2. And I think the point behind this knight d2 idea is if black captures on e4, white will take with the pawn, and black typically here can play e5, and white just develops normally. Knight to f3, bishop's g4, bishop c4, and let's say knight to d7. And white's got a very nice, interesting position. Just develop the pieces to ideal squares. And pretty much a normal game. So that's what happens if black would have taken. But Huebner played g6, preparing to fianchetto their bishop. So Fischer developed. The fianchetto occurred, and then Fischer played g3, preparing bishop g2. Black played e5, it was bishop g2. Black develops with knight to e7, both sides castle kingside, and now Fischer just played rook to e1, gaining the half open file for the rook and supporting the e-pawn. And now black decided to close things down straight away. So it's trying to suffocate white's position. He played d4. It's a pretty nice move because it stops white from playing moves like c4, undermining his d5 pawn. So with the pawn so far advanced, basically black's just going to support it with c5. And white should probably play the move c3 at some point to try and disrupt this in the centre. But to start off with though, knight c4 looks like a very nice move for white. But if knight c4 straight away, maybe black can play b5, forcing white to move it backwards, and then black can just play c5, and has a really nice space advantage. So for this reason, after d4, Fischer played a4, stops b5, and basically Huebner just now supports his d4 pawn with c5. Now, after the c6 pawn has moved, obviously, black can no longer play b5, so c4 is a very nice outpost for Fischer's knight, which he plays knight to c4. And now it frees up his bishop to move along this diagonal as well. So black played knight to c6, and Fischer played c3. As we anticipated, he's going to disrupt the d4 pawn in the centre. It's very important that Fischer breaks up this strong centre for black. But Huebner doesn't take this line down. He plays a very nice move, develops and attacks at the same time. He attacks the c4 knights. Basically the idea is to take that and double white's pawns. Fischer takes on d4, and now Huebner takes on c4. So Fischer recaptures, and then e takes is played. And I put a nice little green arrow here because it just insinuates that the d4 pawn for black is now a pass pawn, and it's supported by c5 pawn at this moment in time. So a very strong pawn in the endgame. So Fischer has to watch out for this because it's going to be very tricky if he swaps to all his pieces to an endgame. Fischer plays actively though, he plays e5. So stunts the bishop on g7 and unleashes his own bishop on this h1 to a8 diagonal. Queen d7 was now played, connecting the two rooks in the back rank. And here Fischer played a bit of a weird move. He played h4. I'm not entirely sure what this move does, and I ran it through with an engine, and it also seems to agree that this is not a suboptimal move, shall we say, for white. I mean, I think white's obviously plan was to maybe play h5 at some point, or maybe just play knights to g5. But maybe Fischer in this position could have just played a normal move like bishop d2. But h4 isn't too bad, it doesn't really wreck anything for white. d3 was now played by black, pushing his d-pawn one step closer to becoming a queen. So Fischer blocks bishop d2, rook a to d8, and now Fischer played bishop c3. So a nice square for the bishop supports his e5 pawn. So the knight, rook and bishop supports his centralised pawn, still blocks the bishop on g7. And now knight b4 was played by black, so again supports his d3 pawn. But now I think Fischer could have played a very aggressive move here. I think then it would make sense why he would have played h4. He could have played knight g5. Point being is now maybe h5 is on the cards and the threat is e6. And again, the computer Stockfish 8, I think it is, loves this move. For instance, let's say black played h6 to attack the knight, then Fischer could have thrown in this e6 move. Huebner probably would have seen this, but the point is after pawn takes, white can play bishop h3, and yeah, black's under a lot of pressure now, because basically the threat is bishop takes e6, followed by check, and pick up the queen. The queen will be forced to move, and white will most likely take this pawn with the knight, and if this happens, then the two rooks are also forked. So yeah, black's losing this position if this is what happened in the game. But after knight b4, Fischer played an interesting move, knight d4. The point being is if black takes this off, then white would just pick up the knight on b4, so it basically would have been a trade. But yeah, black doesn't really want to do that because it makes no sense, because it's just weakening for them. Instead, rook f e8 was played by black. And now Fischer does play this move, e6. It's not the same though, because after pawn takes e6, there's no bishop h3 here. Black can simply play knight to f5. The point being is the rook protects the pawn on e6, and this knight on f5 is also blocking this bishop on h3. So in the game, after pawn takes e6, there was knight takes e6, attacking the rook and the bishop at the same time. But it all works out in the end for black here, because Huebner just takes on c3, attacking the rook on e1 of course, so forces Fischer to take. The pawn is now attacking the knight on b4, but black sees through the tactics, because he can just play knight to c2, forking the two rooks. Of course, Fischer's knight is also attacking black's rook, so it basically just ends in a trade. So Fischer takes the rook, the rook takes the knight, and the threat is still there for black to pick up the exchange back. So Fischer just plays queen d2, black takes their rook, white recaptures, and then there's king to g7. So in the endgame, after the smoke's cleared somewhat, everything's pretty equal, except that Fischer's got a bishop for the knight, and black's actually got a really nice pawn on d3. But it's going to be very hard to hold on to this. Fischer continued then, rook e1, gaining the open file, knight g8 was played, and bishop to d5. So Fischer just says, look, you can take my a4 pawn, which is what black does, and Fischer says, I'll take your d3 pawn. And we'll see what happens now. So it looks as though white's pawn structure is not as good as black's, but Fischer's bishop on d5 is incredibly strong. Now, black continued with rook to e8, and there was just a trade here. Rook takes rook, queen takes, and black actually allowed white to win another pawn. Bishop takes b7. Now black still has an outside pass pawn, and white's pawns are doubled. So probably that pawn didn't matter too much. But it's looking very drawish now. Knight to f6 was played in the game, and Fischer played queen d6, attacking the c5 pawn. And now there was queen d7, offering the trade of queens and attacking the bishop at the same time. Fischer says no thank you, plays queen a6, attacks a7, and Huebner played queen to f7, so threatening to take the pawn on c4. But this is a bit weird because after queen takes a7, for instance, actually black can't play queen takes c4 because then there's bishop d5 with a discovered check and white will pick up the queen. So I don't know, queen f7 looks like a bit of a weird move to me. But he said that actually queen takes a7 for Fischer here was actually not a very good move. Apparently the computer really loves bishop to f3 because it's dominating that knight on f6, and if play continues, let's say queen d7, king g2 and h5, the idea maybe that the computer was suggesting here was moves like queen to b5 followed by queen to c6 and queen to d6, just slowly trying to take this pawn off, I think. But again, it's very difficult to win this game. So for this reason, I think Fischer may have just bailed out here with queen takes a7. Knight to e4 was now played, so queen takes f2 is the threat for black. And yeah, f3 was played, attacking the knight on e4. I should just note again, bishop can't take the knight because then there's queen takes queen, of course. So after f3, the knight went to d6. Also, queen takes f3 here loses again to this discovered bishop takes e4 with check. Yeah, and this is just losing for black. So f3 was played, there was knight d6, the queen and the knight are attacking the bishop. So basically Fischer's just lost their bishop, but has huge compensation. So queen takes c5 was played, knight takes b7, and after queen d4, black played king to g8. So maybe the low rated amongst you are thinking maybe black's doing really well here because they're a piece up. But it should be noted that Fischer has 3 pawns for the knight, which is a lot of compensation, and also has these passed c pawns. King f2 defends the f3 pawn, and we'll see why black doesn't win, because after queen e7 and queen d5, it's very difficult now for black to progress, because basically white can just check the king constantly because there's no defence for Hübner's king here. So king f8, h5, takes, and that's just another pawn gone for black, basically. So there's no way that black's going to be able to queen that h pawn. And after knight c5, queen d5 by Fischer, king g7, now there's just a perpetual with queen d4. The king went to f7, and there was just a few more checks, and both sides agreed a draw. Now I was reading about this game, and it said that Fischer should have probably won the game according to a lot of annotators. And apparently at one point Fischer had over an hour on the clock and Hübner had like a minute left and he was in time trouble. I'm guessing this was around maybe move 40? Maybe around here, or maybe around move 30. I can't remember the time control exactly, but this was actually a really good result for black, I would say. Fischer was maybe about 5 years older than Hübner at the time, so drawing with Fischer as black was actually a really good game for him. And both sides get off the mark anyway after the first round of games. So this was game 1 of Fischer's road to becoming the world champion. I'll be with you with another day with another video for round 2 of this first tournament in the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed and thank you for watching.